At 2:00 in the morning, my phone buzzed, and before my brain woke up, my feet were already on the floor because the alert on that screen wasn't a raccoon or a gust of wind. It was a human shape in my backyard, crouched by the big steel valve on my rainwater tank. The night vision frame sharpened, and I swear my stomach turned to ice. There was our HOA president, immaculate, even in grayscale, twisting my valve open with a key I'd never seen, watching the gauge drop like it belonged to her. I didn't yell, didn't run out there, just stood in the dark with the glow of the screen on my face and thought, all right, Patricia, I see you. Let's do this, right? I'd only owned the house 6 months, but I love that tank like a dog. 5000G filters you could eat off. Sensors I wired into a little dashboard on my phone. The whole thing installed by the previous owner, Frank, who's a retired water engineer and talks about plumbing like it's jazz. I'm a software guy, so the numbers are what hook me. Flow rates, pressure, usage curves, and the numbers had been off for weeks. Neat little 90-minute dips around midnight, like a metronome, which is not how evaporation works and not how a leak behaves either. I told my wife, Rachel, I thought someone was stealing our water. She didn't laugh. She just pushed her hair behind her ear and said, then we track it like a data set, and we make it stick. That's who Rachel is. Calm when my fuse is short. A data scientist who keeps a clean mind when mine wants to grab a hammer. We put up a camera aimed low across the gravel, tucked another one in the rose hedge, and I hardlocked the panel on the control housing. I didn't sleep much waiting for proof, and when Patricia's face bloomed on the screen, sharp as a signature, the anger came in cold, not hot, measured, like a pressure build you could predict. I woke Rachel, showed her the video. She watched with that quiet focus of hers and said, okay, we don't confront, we collect. Assume she'll escalate. Escalate she did. By lunchtime the next day, we had a letter emergency inspection of my aesthetically non-compliant water system scheduled by the HOA vice president, Steve, a man who wears blazers to mow his lawn. They arrived with clipboards and concern, poked at fittings, frowned at the control panel, declared the pipe junction suspicious. I stood there in my own yard handing them the manufacturer's spec sheet like a guy in a sitcom trying not to lose his temper, and they left with nothing they could hang a fine on, which is how I knew they'd be back. Sure enough, 2 days later I got dinged for a landscape neglect. Dead grass around the tank, photos included. I knelt in the dirt, and the smell hit me before the science did. Herbicide, tidy edges, too clean to be drought. Rachel took soil samples and zip tops and labeled them like evidence at a crime scene because that's what it was. I tried to understand why Patricia was obsessed with the tank. I mean, she'd been on us from the day we moved in. Garbage can visible 2 hours past pickup. Hedge a hair over regulation height. I saw this property values that, but the heat she put on this system felt personal. I went back to Frank's giant binder, the one he'd handed me with a wink when we closed, and I saw things I'd skimmed before. The pipe diameters over spec for a single home. Pressure sensors not just at the tank, but downstream in odd places. The wiring harness labeled with zones that didn't exist in my yard. I called Frank on video, held up a page, and he smiled like a magician caught halfway through a trick. Alex, he said, she's special, that system. Read the emergency protocols. They're educational. While we gathered receipts and logs, Patricia called an emergency HOA meeting to our AM through a total ban on rainwater collection. Grandfathering be damned. She brought experts to warn of mosquito plagues and biohazards and plagues of biblical proportions. When I tried to correct the nonsense, she cut my mic on a technicality. Folks, most of them busy and tired and not in the mood for a neighborhood brawl. Voted with the person holding the gavel. 30 days to dismantle the tank or face daily fines. I walked home with that thin HOA smile burned into the back of my eyes and felt the same thing I feel when code compiles wrong. No rage, just a puzzle tightening its grip. That night, our neighbor Olivia, she's the one with the knockout rose garden, told us Patricia had bragged about how low her water bill was, even with the pool. which during a drought is like bragging you can eat cake and lose weight. Rachel and I set up a thermal camera near the fence line, watched for heat signatures in plumbing, and there it was, a thin camouflaged line sneaking from our property towards Patricia's equipment pad. We mapped the dips in our tank against her landscaping schedule that Olivia knew by heart. They matched like mirrors. A friend of Rachel's at the utility pulled anonymized usage stats. Patricia's official numbers were squeaky clean, almost too clean, like she was laundering water the way criminals launder cash. Her household supposedly used less than half the neighborhood average, yet her lawn was emerald green and her pool shimmered like something out of a magazine cover. Rachel and I sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, graphs lined up side by side, my data dips, her irrigation cycles, the line from our tank to her property glowing like a vein in the thermal feed. It wasn't just suspicion anymore, it was evidence. But evidence against an HOA president is like holding a lighter in a hurricane. If you don't shield it right, it snuffs out before it can start a fire. That's when Rachel leaned back, folded her arms, and said the thing that changed everything. We don't just prove she's stealing water. We show she's weaponizing the HOA to cover it up. You can't argue with that. The next week, Patricia doubled down. Another violation, this time unauthorized modification of external utilities. They claimed my tank setup was a community hazard. They demanded immediate removal or face $500 daily fines. I didn't fight it. Not directly. Instead, I filed every notice, every herbicide sample, every photo into a neat digital binder. Then I pulled the last card. Frank had hinted at the emergency protocols. That's when I realized the tank wasn't just a tank. Frank had designed it with redundancies, cut-off valves, remote overrides, even a concealed pressure relief system. This thing wasn't backyard plumbing. It was small-scale municipal grade. It could supply not just my house, but half the block. And suddenly, it made sense. Patricia didn't just want my tank gone. She wanted it for herself. 2 nights later, we staged the test. Rachel synced our thermal footage with the data feed. At 1:57 a.m., the pressure dropped. At 1:59, the camera caught Patricia again. Robe, slippers, and that mysterious key. Crouched at the valve like she owned it. Only this time, she didn't know we'd rerouted the flow. Instead of her pool filling up with my water, the relief line opened, draining straight into a buried capture basin I'd set up the day before. The gauge still dropped, looked exactly like it always did, but not a drop touched her pipes. I let her steal. Nothing. The next morning, her pool pump burned out trying to prime an empty line. By noon, she was on my porch, HOA letter in hand, voice sharp with fake concern. Your system is disrupting neighborhood utilities. I just smiled and said, funny, I've been monitoring everything. Want to see the logs? Her eyes flickered. Half rage, half fear. She stormed off. That weekend, Rachel and I went to the general HOA meeting. Not the emergency session Patricia loved to call, but the full neighborhood one where everyone had a vote. I didn't bring anger. I brought slides. Slide 1. Tank logs showing perfect 90. It dips, always at night. Slide 2. Thermal images of the buried line to Patricia's equipment. Slide 3. Soil tests with herbicide traces by my tank. Slide 4. Utility usage stats compared with real consumption rates. And finally, video footage of Patricia herself, crouched at my valve, twisting it open with her little key. The room went dead silent. Steve, the vice president in his mowing blazer, actually choked. Olivia gasped loud enough for the back row to hear, and Patricia, she stood there frozen, mouth half open, caught like a thief in a spotlight. I ended my little presentation with one line. If this is what our leadership does with something as basic as water, then I think we need new leadership. The vote wasn't close. Patricia was removed as HOA president before she could bang her gavel one last time. Steve resigned 2 days later. The rainwater ban, was reversed unanimously. And the best part, a month later, the city utility contacted me. They'd heard about my system through a neighbor complaint. But after reviewing Frank's engineering and my meticulous data, they offered me a contract, provide consultancy for a pilot program on decentralized water collection. Rachel laughed when I told her. From software to water, she said. Guess we're in a new business. I still check the cameras at night sometimes, but not for Patricia. She sold her house quietly and moved out of state. The pool, empty, the lawn, brown, but my tank. My tank hums like a heartbeat, strong, steady hours, and every time I see that data curve smooth and perfect, I think, nice try, Patricia, nice try.